A medieval magazine. Maybe you are a writer or an editor or a patron of the arts. There's going to be a little something for everybody here. This is just a quick video. I'm doing it live. We're not going to cut anything. I'm just going to do it and then upload it without any edits and all that fancy stuff as quickly as possible because I'm extremely busy. So I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible. But I've already gotten like a dozen DMs. I'm getting people asking me a lot of questions in the comments. And so if I can put out this video, I hate to leave people hanging when they are responding sincerely. So hopefully this will be an adequate wrap up of everything. I've been thinking about this for a while. So I don't have an outline. I'm a terrible note taker. It's one of the reasons why a conversational podcast works well for me. So I've run into a little bit of a conundrum. The conundrum is that I have a Substack. I have a big audience on Twitter, just crossed 30,000. I have over 2,000 on Substack. The podcast is getting anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 listens in the first 2 weeks for every episode now at this point. I think since September 2nd, so almost 2 full months, I think I've only had 3 days where the podcast has had less than 100 views, 100 listens in a day. That's not counting YouTube, so that may actually not even be right. But anyway, 3 days in the last 2 months have had less than 100 listens in a day to any number of podcast episodes. So I've built an audience. I'm good at promoting things. I'm good at generating interest in medieval history. I'm not so good at getting paid. So I've been thinking for a while, how can I create something that makes money, but is related to all the things that I'm already doing? Substack works and is very good, but the trick is that you need to have essentially paywalled content. I like the podcast. I think it's a great resource for people. I've been kind of stewing on it. Maybe I should not post on YouTube. I kind of had decided that's what I was going to do, and then have the episodes of the podcast, essentially the archive would be paywalled to encourage people who are into it to subscribe. I don't really want to do that. I kind of like, I just like it being a resource. I got a comment today from somebody who said that, their 9-year-old son is looking forward to the upcoming episodes. He's homeschooled and listens to all my stuff. I don't know. I don't really want to be putting these things behind paywalls. And of course, if they're homeschooling their kids, they should pay for it or whatever. I'm sure that's what you're going to say. But anyway, I just haven't thought of a good way that feels good to do it. The other thing is that for the guests, I don't pay any of the guests to come on. So for a lot of the guests, and a lot of my guests, it's their first or only recorded conversation. Somebody like Lawrence Marvin, James Noss, Andrew, Shadows Over Constantinople, probably Jan from Knight's Path, Eric, Swordaholic. I'm sure that there's a handful more. Taylor Kniffer on Substack, and the upcoming one with John Gillingham, for example. A lot of the podcast episodes are people who are appearing for the first time. So for them to have access to an episode to showcase their ideas, to be able to promote their work to other people and stuff like that, it's a valuable resource for the podcast guests. I don't know. Long story short, I can't think of a good way to paywall it. The way that you make money on Substack is by having paywalled content. And the model is essentially to have like half free content, half paywalled content. And most people on Substack are not listeners, they're readers. And so it needs to be written content. So of course, what I could do is I could write, a free article and then write a paid article. The truth is, I'm not a very good writer. As I just mentioned, I'm even terrible at notes. This right here was the notes that I came up with for this. 3 words, writers, editors, patrons. That's it. You've seen my writing. I'm good at writing for Twitter. I can write 200 characters or whatever it is, but writing an article, not really my thing. I'm not super good at it. I just don't have a lot of practice. And to be honest, I don't want to get a lot of practice doing it because it's not something I'm trying to do. Actually, I'm trying to use my audience as a vehicle for ultimately selling my artwork, for doing historical art. I'm planning potentially some small curated trips to Europe for some of my audience that wants to come along for something like that. If I wanted to just churn money, I could just print hats that say Memory Medieval and sell a dozen of those a month or something. I could do t-shirts. I have people tell me stuff like that. You should sell t-shirts. You should sell this. You should sell this. I don't know. We don't have to get into it. That's just not my thing. I want to do things of value that are meaningful to me. And anyway, so my solution to this is to start a magazine. Originally, when I thought of this, I thought maybe I should just partner with a good writer. And so that was kind of where my head was at, was if I partner with a good writer who doesn't have an audience, I have the audience, we partner on a publication. Bingo, bango. You see where I'm going with this? And I don't think that that's where I'm going to go with this. Actually, I should have put a TLDR for writers at the start. This is not going to be, this is mostly for editors and potential patrons who I'm not looking for money for myself, but for the writers and potentially the editor. So writers, stay tuned. There's going to be submission options, and I'll actually cover what I want here so you can start thinking about it if you want to go through it. But TLDR, there's not, I've decided not to go the single writer route with the project. And the reason is it just seems really difficult. Because of course a writer is going to have sort of their own creative vision. I don't want to be editorializing a writer all that much. And it's sort of a big ask. The ideal goal for the project is to do 2 articles a week, a free one and a paid one. That seems like kind of a big ask for a writer. Like, hey, can you churn out 2 articles a week indefinitely? For somebody who's not doing that already. I mean, if you're doing that already, then you probably already are published, or you already have your own audience thing that you're building. You have your own Substack, all those types of things. It just seems like without knowing somebody already who kind of fits what I would be looking for, it would be very difficult to try to go through and find somebody who I know is going to have like the motivation and the follow through and be able to do that for months and months to build something up. However, what seems more feasible is to find somebody who's a good editor. And if you're a writer who wants to be an editor, then we can talk about that, of course. Now, bringing on an editor and then paying writers obviously means less money in the project for me. But I think the project overall will be better in turning into some sort of medieval magazine. So that's the vision, is a medieval magazine with myself as sort of the operations / promotion sales guy, and an editor who wants to come on board and read through submissions and essentially sort of select and curate what we publish and sort of give writers some guidance, I suppose. So let's talk about that. The idea for this. So here's the idea for the project. Importantly, it is not. So let's talk about what it's not, actually. Maybe that'll make it easier. So first, what it's not is it's not fantasy. It's still based in medieval history, but it's also not scholarly. And maybe I should say this. This is the aspirations for the project. And I'm pretty sure this is something that nobody's doing. Feel free to let me know. Comment. Let me know if somebody's doing something like this. Maybe I should just partner with them, actually. But my vision for the project is like an old blog for soccer that I used to love, or football if you're in Europe, or football if you're in Latin America. I used to be very much 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was big into the soccer. I'm American, so for all my Europeans, I apologize, but I was very big into soccer. And there was this blog called The Run of Play. And I'm going to read you one of the articles from here at the very end. It's called The Run of Play. And it was edited by this guy who was also a writer named Brian Phillips. And he had a bunch of writers. And they would post periodically. I think they have a total of like 1,000 essays, essentially, on this blog. It was just essays. And the idea of the blog was that the essays are about more of a metaphysical, spiritual, philosophical, conceptual angle on the sport. It's not sport analysis, like in the sense of like, well, this guy does this and this guy does this, and here's like a report on something. It was not typical sports writing at all, which is part of why I loved it. I just loved it. Unfortunately, they had to move on to different things. So what it's not like a history journal for a scholarly article. And I should say, I guess at the beginning, there's nothing wrong with that stuff. Of course, we like scholarly articles. We like scholars. We like, official historical writing. Whatever I'm saying here doesn't mean any of this is bad. It's just not part of the vision. So it's not scholarly writing and scholarly articles. It's not straightforward nonfiction. So like, here's an article on what happened at the Battle of Agincourt. There's already a lot of people who do that stuff. That stuff's already out there. That kind of writing is out there. There's places for that, just like with the history writing. It's not fiction. It's not fantasy. And it's, I can't think of a way to put it. It's not silly either. The point of this is not to be silly. It's not satirical or, and obviously the publication, I don't want there to be a lot of editorial heavy-handedness. I want writers to have a lot of free expression within the confines of what the publication is about. And the publication is about, it's pro-Western civilization. Just like all of my other content, I think this stuff will be pretty obvious if you're familiar with my content. It's pro-Western civilization. I think heroism is good. I don't think that medieval people were backwards and stupid. And if there's one thing that we can learn from history, it's that the deeds of our ancestors were aspirational, and we should look at what it took them to build what we now enjoy and aspire to rise to that level. That's sort of a rough outline. Obviously, I'll sort of work this out with the editor, and we'll come up with like a submissions page and guidelines and all these types of things, 500 words to 2,000 words or something like this. And, have a separate submissions email. So please do not email me with your submission. If you have a writing submission or anything like that, don't write anything for me. Don't write me with a submission, because that's all going to go to a separate email address where we have everything. And we're going to find a way to organize that and go through that when I find an editor. This is for me to find an editor to partner with on the project, and potentially some patrons of the arts, investors, whomever. It's not really an investment, because I would only be looking for money to pay the other people. And there's no return on investment. So I'm not offering any of that. And speaking of which, to get this off of the ground, of course, I want to pay the authors for their work, but I cannot pay a lot. So at the beginning, for initial submissions, it might be something like $20 a piece. So maybe and it's going to be in groups of 2, because you're going to have one free piece that everybody can enjoy, and then one paid piece that goes behind the paywall. We'll have submission guidelines for all this stuff. So anyway, $20 per piece to start, unless we get a patron, some sort of investor, somebody who is willing to pay artists, pay these authors directly. You don't even have to pay me. Don't give me any money. Same with the editor, whoever's the editor, don't give me any money. I don't want the investors to even give me some money. We'll come up with their contact information and send it to you, and you can just pay them directly via PayPal or something like that. So I'm not looking for anybody to send me any money now or ever over this project until we get it going, and then you can subscribe. So writers, we'll have submissions for you later. If you're a patron of the arts and an investor, you can send me an email. Let me put the email link up on the screen. You can send me an email, and I will, and just make sure that the subject, put it patron in capital letters. If you are willing to donate to the project and essentially just pay the artists or the editor directly yourself, and we'll come up with whatever it is. I don't even know what you pay authors. I don't know what's a reasonable rate for a piece. Put that in the comments, I guess. What's the rate for a piece that is 1,000 words, let's say, and we're just going to pay a flat rate because and so let me break down the finances of the project, I guess. What I envision in my head anyway is it's all going to be off of Substack paid subscriptions. So let's say if it's at $6 a month and we can get 500 subscribers. It's kind of a reasonable number in the first few months, I think, potentially. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe not. It might be really difficult. Maybe that's an end of first year goal. Maybe it's longer. Who knows? I don't know. I'm ambitious. I'm aggressive. But let's just do the math, right? $6 a month, 500 subscribers. That's $3,000. I'm thinking it's going to be a 30%, 30%, 40% split. So myself and the editor will get 30% of whatever that final payout is. And then the artist, the 40% will go into the artist pool. So essentially, the author pool. So essentially, each author will get 10% of whatever our take for the month was as their payment, with a floor of $20. So I'll pay $20. If we end up obviously making more than that, which I'm not doing the math on how many subscriptions we have to make at $6 to do more than that. But once we get more than that, then the authors will just get paid out from that pool every month. So for the editor, somebody who's considering being an editor, we'll have to see if any patrons are willing to pay you, or if you're willing to help me curate the project and grow it. Essentially just getting that 30%. 30% of whatever the project is. So I'll get 30%, you'll get 30%, and the authors will get 40%. That's going to be the financial breakdown on that. So, what is the magazine like? 18 minutes, and I haven't even talked about what it's like. My gosh. So what is the magazine like? The magazine is essentially like a philosophical, metaphysical, alternate angle, potentially even alternate history look at medieval history. The idea being that it is something of a general interest in a way that somebody could just read or listen to if we have an audio component to it as well. That will essentially make medieval history interesting from a different way. And I'll read you an example of this, but let me give you a couple other ones. If you're familiar with Malcolm Gladwell books, that's one thing that comes to mind, Malcolm Gladwell books. For example, in his book, Blink, he talks about psychological aspects, but in different ways, different psychological concepts, and then he narrates them in everyday life. So you're able to sort of have a tangible way of thinking about psychological concepts. So like I'll give you an example. One of a chapter in Malcolm Gladwell's book explains why hockey players are how the composition of the NFL, which players get selected, why half of them have birthdays in January, February, or March. As it turns out, the cutoff day in Canada, which most professional hockey players are from Canada, the cutoff for those for age limits is January 1st. So you end up with the oldest players being born in January, February, and March. The oldest players are going to be bigger than the other players. They're going to be faster than the other players. And then those players will essentially get selected for better coaching, which then makes them better. And then they're bigger and stronger and have better coaching. Rinse and repeat across their entire youth career. And half or over half or whatever it is of NFL players are all born in January, February, March for this reason. It's not something that you would think about until he did the analysis, but it's sort of an interesting look into how that works, an interesting look into that thing. So it could be, or I wrote a little bit on Twitter the other day. I think I reposted it on the Substack about how we sort of think about somebody being a great hero because of the results, because they went into a battle and won a battle. But fortune is fickle. And so there are also great heroes who maybe fortune goes against them. And so it sort of is a different way to think about Ladislaus III. And it's a different way to think about how maybe luck affects our perception and, just sort of a different angle in looking at these things. You can go and read that if you're interested. I'm not claiming to be a good writer. It's just an interesting thought that I had that I wrote out. And so I've envisioned sort of things like that, where somebody has an introduction into thinking about medieval history from a different way, maybe through concepts like, courage or valor or luck. Maybe it's through how this thing influenced something else that we think about later, maybe, or how something grew out of something in the past, or some other sort of metaphysical concept, some sort of philosophy, something else. I realize, and that sort of is the other reason I'm going away from the single author model, because I think that this will be a great exercise and challenge that many people, hopefully many authors, will be interested in, authors and historians. And it's also a really massive challenge to try to spring on a single person. Hey, can you come up with these kinds of ideas, and write it twice a week for no money to start, for $20 an article to start? That's a big ask. But it also seems like in the end, this will be a great way to sort of help spin up a lot of attention on a variety of authors and historians, kind of like how my podcast does, and give a lot of different opportunities to a lot of different people and create a bigger network. And then we can sort of maybe sell a physical version of a magazine at the end of every year or something like that, a little anthology or something. Anyway, the reason I think this is unique and a great idea is because, aside from it's sort of in line with how I think about things and stuff that I enjoy, it's my project. And I don't mean that, obviously. It is what it is. But aside from that, it seems like it's something that people generally enjoy. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell was very famous, but also, it's something that allows people who aren't into medieval history a little bit of a different gateway into medieval history. It allows them, the idea is that it will allow them to think about medieval history in a different way. And I'll give you an example of that from this soccer blog. It's at runofplay.com if you want to go read some of these articles. And I'm going to read it to you now, so that way I could just talk about it a little bit at the end, and so you can kind of get an idea, because obviously what I'm talking about is it's not an exact science. It's an art. And it's not, I'm obviously making a big ask of authors to come up with something that's a little bit different, certainly than what you're used to and how you're used to thinking about writing, perhaps. But I think something like this would be very exceptional, not just because it's unique and different, but because of the way that it will allow authors and historians to explore history in a different way and give you an outlet for that. I mean, I'm sure that we'll be able to get very shortly 1,000 readers per article. I think, like I said, I have well over 30,000 followers combined. So I think within a few months, we should be averaging, 1,000 readers per article. So it'll allow authors to take on something challenging and do something different and have it be read. But it will also allow readers an opportunity to explore medieval history in a different way. And let me give you this example. This is an article about soccer. Keep in mind, it's called The Double. This is from, and the little tagline is Augusto Neto, that's the author, on Chelsea's new Mourinho in air quotes. The only thing, if anyone's not familiar, the only thing you really need to know about this is after they've had a coaching change at the club Chelsea, and they previously had a manager who was pretty seminal in their recent streak, named Jose Mourinho, who was just very unique and exceptional and polarizing and just an immense figure. And so they've got a new manager who is not even named in the article, first of all. But he discusses this new manager, and Mourinho was, I believe, a couple managers previous. So it's not that this guy's even taking over from Mourinho. He worked with Mourinho at some point, and I guess when they hired him, they said, "Oh, he's the new Mourinho." And this is back from 2011. It's called The Double. The mainstream football media are convinced that there is a new Mourinho at Chelsea. Although I'm inclined to agree, I'm not entirely sure who this new Mourinho actually is. Of course, to even ask who this new Mourinho is implies a form, a Mourinho from whom to begin. Jose Mourinho was a Chelsea manager, young, Portuguese, poached from Porto after a blistering season domestically and in Europe, who was expected to grasp a small but ambitious club by the horns and haul it that final step, which it couldn't take under its previous Italian coach. However, for this new subject to follow its form, it must follow its path both to and from the point at which they most strikingly overlap. In other words, the new Mourinho can't just arrive in similar circumstances. He must replicate the latter's success, emulate him to the point of absurdity. The trouble is that last time, that wasn't enough for Roman Abramovich. Mourinho brought the Premier League, the FA Cup, and the League Cup, but just didn't quite make it to the Champions League final. Combined with his prickly nature, his ultimate failure to deliver Europe's grandest prize meant that Europe's most demanding owner outside of Italy felt obliged to oust him. Though you wouldn't think it, Chelsea have hardly gone backwards since Mourinho departed. The perennially unloved Avram Grant, he of the hangdog expression and poor reputation, took them to a Champions League final, and the recently sacked Carlo Ancelotti regained the title 14 months ago before a bizarre mid-season collapse saw his side drop back to second last season. His win ratio during his tenure was higher than Mourinho's. Indeed, people forget that Mourinho actually left during what might otherwise have been Chelsea's worst season since the Abramovich takeover, and that since that messy affair, they have done quite well, particularly if we consider the sudden lack of investment in players from their previously profligate patron last summer. It seems to follow, therefore, that the idea of who follows a form what. The new Mourinho is a return to an idea, the idea fostered by Jose during his tenure that he and only he could bring Chelsea the success their fan base, football's nouveau riche, so desperately craved. Mourinho, as a concept works better than the man because the man is inherently, and lovably, at least in England, flawed. The man is arrogant, proud, and sometimes base in his poorly veiled press conference insults. And that's base in 2011, not in 2025 terms. The man, however, feeds the myth. The infamous us versus them mentality, the melodramatic swinging about of the arms at the injustice of poor referees' decisions, even the benevolent humor when things are going well, all serve to create the idea of the club as an impregnable fortress. This fortress is built on victories, of course, and in this sense, the man and the myth are inseparable. Because Mourinho delivers victories everywhere he goes, but the ultimate difference between the man and the myth is that whilst the man can fall, and he has fallen in the past, his failure serves only to fuel the fervor of the myth. It's classic dictatorship. Whilst the man, the leader, is fallible, the idea only gains in strength from his failure because expectations are so high and the individual observer's dependency on them are so great that said failure is interpreted as nothing less than tragedy. Tragedy, by definition, affects the great. With Mourinho, Chelsea were great. This is why it's so important that Chelsea have a new Mourinho. The man, as he is keen to point out, is not that similar to his predecessor. Though he shares Mourinho's enjoyment of manipulating the media, he does not thrive on conflict. He does not build fortresses. His problem, or potentially the problem for Mourinho's legacy, is that he has walked straight into a ready-made fortress. It's in a bit of a state from the pounding it's taken recently, but under the right leadership, it can once again be great. Fortress Mourinho has haunted Chelsea since he left. It is Fortress Mourinho that makes it look as though Chelsea have been in crisis for years. Sorry, coffee. The idea of the doppelganger, or double, has troubled Western culture for centuries. As an expression of the deepest, I'm not going to read the footnotes. There are footnotes here as well, and I'll put a link to this below if you want to go read it for yourself or read any other articles on there to get an idea. The idea of the doppelganger, or double, has troubled Western culture for centuries. As an expression of the deepest insecurities of identity and self, the double, as represented in Western literature, is always the superior manifestation of what the individual can never be. In Poe and Wilde, he represents conscience. In Dostoevsky and Kafka, he is the emblem of a society from which the protagonist feels alienated and excluded. The protagonist is always egotistical. He must be, for the activation of the double idea has to come from some form of insecurity, and insecurity is rooted in the positive ideas of self, subjectivity, and individuality. It is egotism as internal conflict which annihilates him. All the new Mourinho has to do to succeed, and all the new Mourinho has to do is succeed, and Chelsea will become his fortress. The tools are certainly there, whilst the principal conductors of the Mourinho machine, the likes of John Terry, Frank Lampard, Michael Essien, Didier Drogba, are in their late careers. Additions have been made to the squad which make it more than a match for anyone else in Europe. David Luiz has the potential to be one of the finest central defenders of his generation. His former teammate at Benfica, Ramirez, is slowly settling in, and of course there's the potential for Fernando Torres to suddenly explode into form. There will be more signings, quite possibly from last season's all-conquering Porto side, and the new Mourinho is already well acquainted with the club and its infrastructure. All he needs to do is win, and his almost comical similarity to his predecessor will ensure that Chelsea will at least be able to look away from the haunting specter of Mourinho. In essence, the end of the persona could be the beginning of new life at Chelsea, whose stagnant air appears to be wrapped in that Portuguese idea of saudade, the unresolved longing for a mythologized past, instilled the moment Mourinho left. It's ironic that it took the arrival of someone so intimately related to Mourinho to revive the club. The new Mourinho has the chance to make Chelsea great again. That's funny. And in his own image. Whether his image is nothing more than that of Mourinho is difficult to say. What can be said, however, is that there has already been a break with tradition. The new Mourinho has been fast-tracked on the back of the successes of his predecessor. He did the brilliant first season part, but he did not have the chance to lead Porto in the Champions League. Chances are he would have taken his side into the second round or possibly the quarterfinals and then been dispatched by Barcelona or even Mourinho himself at Real Madrid. His stock this summer was excuse me. His stock this summer was the highest it will ever be, and Chelsea bought it. He worked with Mourinho. Everything about him is like Mourinho. He must be good as Mourinho. Maybe he is. He certainly made it quicker. Is Mourinho's doppelganger to be the haunting alter ego of the flawed protagonist? Will he take Chelsea to new heights in a manner more pleasing, less abrasive than old Jose's? Or will he crash and burn, overwhelmed by a two-year jump from academia in the nether regions of Portugal's Los Sangres to Chelsea at the pinnacle of the European game? Either way, Mourinho loses. Any victory will replace Mourinho's image with that of his successor. Any defeat will strip the new Mourinho of any individuality and make his failure a failure of the Mourinho idea. If the rivalry with Barcelona didn't mean Jose needed that Champions League trophy with Real badly enough already, he has double the reason now. So he, in this essay, he explores the idea of the doppelganger. So he talks about, obviously, this is in a situation where Chelsea have hired this new coach who they are referring to as the new Mourinho. So he's exploring this new coach's entrance, hiring in relation to the old Mourinho and how he's like the doppelganger. And then he even ends it brilliantly by saying how Jose Mourinho has double the reason now to win the Champions League, not just for himself, but to sort of shake off this potential doppelganger curse, if you will, that could happen from this new coach coming in, who's essentially his predecessor or his successor. So it deals with these concepts of the doppelganger, the double identity, and the psychology of taking over the club. What does it really mean? What this concept of the new guy, what does that mean? Is it a who? Okay, we're looking at the who. It's a what. So you could see it's sort of a very different, like a philosophical, metaphysical, unique angle of looking at sport. And so what I'm thinking in my head is a philosophical, metaphysical, conceptual way of looking at medieval history, compiled together with various authors in a magazine that will be the medieval magazine. That's the concept. So I need an editor. That's what this is about. I need an editor. So I need an editor who has something of that vision within those parameters, who wants to basically read a lot of submissions and curate this kind of magazine that I will then promote and organize and do a lot of the operational things, potentially set up to be able to sell physical magazines, anthologies at the end of every year, something like that, to help raise some additional money, things like that. Obviously that'll be theoretically a steady thing that will allow us to network with authors and do various other medieval history and magazine related things. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, please send me an email. I will put my email up on the screen and put in capital letters in the subject, please, editor. I'm going to get a handful of emails about this. And so please let me know that you are writing about being an editor. And of course, for any of the patrons that wish to support this project, if you wish to be able to get on board to pay the editor or the authors, please email and put patron in capital letters. And, if we get this rolling, we can launch on January 1st. And start having some submissions in the next few weeks, iron this all out, and launch on January 1st for the new year. Great way to measure progress and so forth, to to launch in the new year. So that's the vision. That's the idea. That's the concept. Something that's very different, but still historically accurate. That's around these, other concepts, spiritual concepts, metaphysical concepts, analyzing things from a different angle, maybe even some tasteful alt history. I don't want it to be wacky, but like tasteful. If you listened to my episode with Matt Lewis on the podcast, I asked him about an alternate history scenario if Richard III won at Bosworth, and I thought that was super interesting. Very informed and tasteful, a tasteful alt history. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I think it'd be very unique. I think authors will dig it. Although I guess you can tell me whether you think, if you're an author, if you think that would be something that you would enjoy writing about for. And if you're not any of those, but you're into medieval history, you can let me know if you think that would be something that would be worth reading. So of course, I appreciate any and all feedback. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you very much. Enjoy the weekend.